Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. I am Ella, Jeff's assistant. Great to have you join us. Hope you had a good week, and I hope you're enjoying this holiday season. It can be a wonderful time for many, and it can also be a very challenging time. So I hope you're enjoying this holiday season. Jeff's going to go into the new moon that's approaching, and he's also going to talk about Mercury Retrograde that's approaching us. And then he's going to talk about some financial stuff this week. So take it away, Jeff.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, definitely. We got the old dreaded Mercury retrograde about ready to happen. But the interesting thing about this one is Mercury goes retrograde within hours of the new moon. We have a new moon on December 12th, which is, of course, going to be this coming Tuesday. And what's interesting is this new moon is not an eclipse, but new moons, as I've always said, is the seed planting time. You know, the sun is the seed, the moon is the crucible. So, and it happens every month. It happens 13 times a year usually. And it's a time when the energy gets lower, and we also can find meditation or planting seeds or setting goals is a good time to do this. And especially this time of year, you know, it's important for us to stay positive. A lot of people get very depressed around the holiday seasons. And, you know, it's a time when the energy ebb is lower. We're heading towards the winter solstice on the 21st, which we'll be talking about on the next podcast. So it's always good to keep yourself up. Take it easy. Get a little more rest. It's good to, you know, be easy on your body. Again, I love reflexology and acupuncture and all this type of stuff, which is natural ways to keep our flow moving. So this is a time also, too, when you can do a little cleansing, a little purging, you know, parasite cleansing, so on and so forth. You got to be careful with that stuff. But if you're not on meds, it works really powerful. So again, this new moon happening on the 12th happens right hours before. In fact, the new moon is actually going to happen in the sidereal zodiac right at about 26 degrees Scorpio, 31 minutes. Now, if you're a tropical astrologer, it's actually going to be at 20 degrees Sagittarius, 40 minutes. So there's about a 24-degree difference. You know, I always get people saying to me, well, the tropical zodiac's not accurate. And I always say, well, you know, the sidereal is very powerful, and it seems to move on a deep soul level. But I would also say the tropical's accurate, too, because it does mark our solstice and equinoctial points, which are very powerful points to us all throughout the year. So this again, and we'll be talking more about that on the solstice coming up in the next podcast. So this is a very powerful time because Mercury goes retrograde for all practical purposes on the day of the new moon next Tuesday. And that puts a further emphasis on retracing, rethinking, and maybe, you know, definitely backing up your data and also kind of revising plans. And again, we're approaching the end of the year, and it's a powerful time to kind of rehash and rethink and where you're going. And maintenance is always a good idea to do during Mercury retrograde, and definitely drive careful too. So Mercury goes through, as I'd mentioned, three major phases. The first one is what we call the Occidental phase. And of course, people may recognize that word because of a company called Occidental Petroleum. And I'll give you a little idea what the oil companies know about astrology, right? And the bankers. So the interesting thing is when Mercury goes retrograde, it will start moving backwards into the eye of the sun, which is going to happen right at about the 22nd of December. So it's roughly about 10 days. It'll go backwards into the eye of the sun. Then it passes through the sun, which is a very powerful time, and then starts moving into the Oriental phase. So the Mercury retrograde will be over with right after the first of the year on January 2nd at about 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So it always goes retrograde approximately 3 weeks. It's not exact. And this does this 3 times per year. And I always say these are the 3 times during the year that you can really retrace, rethink, and most importantly, look at, if you have ability to do so, where is Mercury going retrograde in your birth chart? And you'll find, even in corporate charts, I find where it goes retrograde, there's often an area of focus either in your own life or in your business's life or the business you might work for. So the point is that you pay attention and it emphasizes that area of life. And a lot of people are pretty familiar with astrology now. And of course, there's the 12 divisions called houses. So this is a cool thing to keep track of. Very, very powerful. So also, we've been mentioning in previous podcasts that, the United States has this very powerful set of energies coming up on it between now and 2025. And powerful's not the word. We've been sitting with primary directed or solar arc directed Mars right over the United States moon ever since the end of November, beginning of December. Now, this, interestingly enough, does not separate until the middle of the month. And it's just after this new moon. And I'm very pleased that nothing major has happened. Not that the war in Israel and Ukraine and shootings and all the crazy stuff that's going on is good either, because it certainly isn't. But at least we haven't seen somebody nuke a city or any other crazy events that could happen. We could see the war deepening in the Middle East, and I think it's being funded to do so, actually. We'll get into that in a little bit. But the bottom line is we're seeing I think something behind the scenes that is much more powerful. And we may not be hearing about it on the mind control news. And it's interesting because I've had a lot of very knowledgeable clients in the financial businesses and banking. We even had some, I shouldn't mention this, attorneys that work in very high places in the government. I'll just say that. And I was just in a session the last couple of days with a very interesting man in Stockholm, Sweden. And he brought to my attention a person named David Webb. People may have heard of him, and I'll actually hold it up. It's a book called The Great Taking. And you can actually get this book free on the internet. And I was so enamored when I got it. I stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning reading it. And it's about all the stuff that we're hearing about in the New World Order takeover. And this guy, David Webb, actually knows George Soros. In fact, his company, he ran a huge hedge fund, of course, in Washington and also Wall Street in New York. So what's interesting is he had met Soros, George Soros, back, I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s. And Soros had even said to him, you have no idea what these people at the top of the pyramid can do. Well, who are these people at the top of the pyramid? Well, we certainly know they're the bankers, and they're the people who really run the Western financial institutions, which is the ones that are behind the curtain of the Federal Reserve. And again, back to astrology, this all precipitated right before World War I, right at the end of 1913. The Federal Reserve Act was put in. Wilson signed the country over to them, and they basically run the entire financial systems, not only in the United States, but with most of the European countries. Well, what this book speaks about is the serpentining noose that they've been putting around not just the United States, but all westernized countries, and I believe probably every country in the world, and in one indirect way or another. And of course, World War I was to destroy some of the Ottoman empires and also financial holds and other very powerful financial holds that were in Europe. And we also saw the Great Depression. And this book actually speaks about how the Fed actually caused the Great Depression by making sure a very large bank in New York went broke in 29, and it caused a toppling of all these smaller banks, which allowed them to get more control. And we saw when Nixon took us off the gold standard. And we have seen a tightening of the noose. I think 9/11 was a trigger that was extremely powerful. And there's actually a graph, I'll put this on the screen, which shows something called the velocity of money. And it's just a simple formula. We take the gross domestic product of a country and you divide it by the available cash flow, which equals velocity. Well, it's quite fascinating how this person's pointing out in this book that clearly it hit rock bottom right when the Great Depression happened. It also happened again right in 1949. But right now, in 2023, actually since 9/11 forward, we have been on a straight down trajectory, even though nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. Everything's fine because you can still go to the grocery store, get your milk and buy your whatever you buy and your gas. And, the economy's still rolling. But a very eerie thing he points out in this book is happening. And that's why he's putting the book out for free. I'm not promoting it, but I think the information is very germane to what the astrology says right now. And that is literally all of the assets that we all own, including everything in the country, is being collateralized through these very upper echelon financial institutions. And, everyone would sit there and say, well, you ain't getting my house, right? Well, maybe not. But on the other hand, all assets under the umbrella of a nation is literally being very covertly collateralized. We've heard of the straw man thing and all that. So, and this is not conspiracy theories. I've heard this from many different people. And again, I'm not a financial expert, but what's fitting the astrology to the T, and this is what I said, from 2020 forward, we had COVID come in, we had all this stuff going on with the politics, and we have seen a literal destructive force globally trying to take out, under the Green New Deal and also the climate change rules, literally destroy the economic structures of the middle classes, not only in the United States, but this is going on all over Europe, all over many different countries. Some countries are rebelling against it. And then we've got this polarization with the BRICS nations. So what I'm leading up to here is the United States, which is probably the linchpin in the Western financial systems, is literally on the chopping block here. And probably one of the most targeted countries, because if the United States falls with its democracy, Bill of Rights, and all of that, even though I don't think they're going to do that directly, but they're going to try. You see, if you control the money, it's like, I think it was Rothschild said this. He said, you give me control of the money and I don't care who makes the laws. That also echoes what both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson said many centuries ago, a few centuries ago, two to be exact, 2.5 or thereabouts. They said, if anyone ever gets to print our money, they will be more dangerous than any standing army ever could be. Well, that's exactly what happened. And we're seeing the effects of this right now because all these countries are literally at the effect of, if they don't play ball with the legal structures that are going on behind the scenes of very covert stuff, guess what? You don't get any money. And they can crush the economic structures of any given country. All our politicians in Washington, they make the laws but they're influenced by the flow of money. And I can tell you, if the money stops, if the faucet is turned off, how are they going to have an appropriations commission that, gives money to the military, pays the bills? We hear this all the time. Well, the government's going to be shut down if we don't, reappropriate new bills. So it's all about the money. Even though, humanity has given its power over to these financial, situations, we used to live off the land. And, now we're in a technocratic world where the internet and all of our food and all of our sustenance comes from, and our way to sleep every night. If you don't pay your taxes, they'll take your house. You don't pay your rent, they'll throw you on the street. We see the people sleeping under bridges. So this is really a full circle of a potential global totalitarianism moving its way in and serpentining around humanity. Now, I always say, could something stop it? Because I remember in 1976, I had a man named Wesley Pavlon. He was very wealthy. Many people have probably heard of the Milwaukee Bucks. He used to own the Milwaukee Bucks when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was very famous and they won the championship. And I was on a construction crew building a house. And I'll never forget this. He grabbed a pickaxe out of my hand. I thought he was crazy. I thought, is he going to hit me? But he was a cool guy. And he slammed the pickaxe in the ground and he said to me, he says, this is real. He says, all this money is not real. He said a few centuries ago, we started issuing fiat currencies and security notes. This actually started in the kingdoms back, again, probably in the 1500s, 1600s. And ever since then, the fiat currency systems, and of course, we've seen this in Germany, we've seen it in other countries, South American countries, where the fiat systems crash. The difference is with where we're at, and Alan Greenspan might have said it best, the system's too big to fail. And it's this massive, massive machine of trillions of dollars exchanging hands on a very frequent basis. And they hold the keys to it. There was a guy you may have heard of, George Carlin. He said, they got you by and I'll leave it to your memory, but literally they seem to. And this is the war I've been speaking about between, you could say, the globalists and the nationalists, because the globalists don't need to take over. They already own it. It's just a matter of what are they going to do next? And we're seeing a lot of what's happening. The destruction of the middle class. They want to put in digital currency, and they're going to not be in a hurry to do it. So these are the forces that are in play. And I only bring this up because I think the astrology this coming year in the United States is going to be a pivotal point where we're going to see the outcome of this play, whether the nationalists are defeated and the globalists are in power completely. Because right now it seems to be this push-pull situation, and it's very complex at the top of the pyramid. So divinity always wins, and they never seem to take over. And to finish that story with Wesley Pavlon, literally, he was sure the entire financial systems were going to crash right around the early 80s. And of course, if we remember, that was just after Nixon took us off the gold standard in the early 70s. So he was talking to me about this in 1976. It never happened. And I keep hearing this, and it just keeps getting kicked down the road. The can just keeps getting kicked down the road. But they get more and more power over the national, you could say, political bodies that run these countries. It's the bankers at the top of the pyramid. These are the owners George Carlin talked about.
Politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear.
So this is a very interesting scenario. And it's very appropriate to what the astrology shows this coming couple of years, especially where the United States is going to end up, because the United States is also in what we mentioned, Sadi Sate, which is the transit of the Saturn over the United States moon. And that doesn't end until the spring of 2025, when all this white noise, splashes out on the shore as to where it's going to end up. And the final phase of Sadi Sate, because it's a 7.5-year period, ends actually in 2028, when we start moving into the next Saturn Pluto. So this is interesting stuff, and we're all sitting here with a front row seat, and it's going to be very interesting to see where it all goes.
We sure do have a front row seat, don't we? Well, thanks so much for this, Jeff, and thank you all for joining us this week. Have a good week ahead. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next Friday on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.